Hello, everyone, and welcome to this information webinar called Assessment Tools for Special Education Teachers. My name is Aoife O'Sullivan, and this is Aisling Barrett, and we are delighted to welcome you to this webinar today. Aisling and I both completed the Bachelor of Education in Education and Psychology in Mary Immaculate College in 2014, and we have since been working as primary school teachers and have a wide range of experience from junior infants all the way up to sixth class and as special education teachers. Aisling is currently working with IDA, which is formerly the NIPT and is involved in supporting newly qualified teachers. And I am currently an assistant principal in my school, but I am on maternity leave at the moment, and Aisling is currently teaching fifth class. We are the owners of Lanoon Education. This is our Instagram handle here on the screen, and we would really appreciate a follow if you find this webinar useful. So firstly, an overview of tonight's webinar. So the purpose of the webinar is to understand the continuum of support and its role for you as a special education teacher, and indeed as a classroom teacher as well, to use the student support file to track assessment and pupil progress on the continuum of support, to understand the importance of choosing effective and appropriate assessment tools, and to identify and use a wide range of assessment tools for the infant classes, literacy, numeracy, social skills, motor skills, and challenging behaviours. So Aisling is going to begin by talking about the continuum of support.
I suppose it's important to start with the continuum of support when we're considering assessment, because depending on what stage of the continuum of support the child is at, it will influence the assessments that you choose. So we're going to give a brief overview of the continuum of support before we delve into the assessments in particular. So I suppose the continuum is there to identify and respond to pupils' needs. And it recognises that these needs occur along a continuum and that interventions and assessments should be incremental. You track the progress of a child that moves through the continuum in their student support file, and we have a link to a student support file in a later slide. And it's important to recognise that it's not diagnosis based. So for example, you might have a child who is on school support who has a diagnosis, or you might have a child on school support plus who does not have a diagnosis. Now, ideally, when you reach School Support Plus stage, you are looking at involving outside agencies to seek further support, but it does not necessarily mean that just because a child has a diagnosis that they are automatically at any certain stage of the continuum of support. For example, last year I had 3 children in my class who had autism, and they were autistic, and one of the children was on classroom support, one of the children was not on the grade at all, and another child was at School Support Plus. So it's just important that it is not diagnosis based. So as I said, you track their support in the student support file. Any assessments you carry out, anytime you ring parents or in contact with outside agencies, you log all of it in the log of actions that is contained within the student support file. And there is a link there directly to a Word document that you can download a student support file to edit yourself. So these questions are useful when you're moving through the continuum. You start with what is the concern? Why is it happening? And this is where the assessment and the information gathering happens. How can we help? And you're planning your interventions based on the assessments that you've carried out and reviewing, did it work, before you continue on to the next concern. So just to briefly look through classroom supports, again, the classroom support plan is led by the classroom teacher. But it's important that if you're working with a particular class that you know which children are on classroom support, and you can see a classroom support plan on the slide there, and you're asking yourself these questions, or the class teacher is asking, do the pupil's skills or behaviour fall within the range that is considered typical for his or her age group? And to what extent do the gaps in either behavioural or academic difficulties affect their socialisation and their learning? And how are they responding to simple interventions? And this will be done in conjunction with the parents, just simple differentiation techniques that the classroom teacher is carrying out to support them at classroom level. If the child's needs are not being met at classroom support level, it may be decided to move a child to school support. Now, depending on the child, you might start at school support as you realise very quickly maybe a child has moved to another school, or they're experiencing significant difficulties that they need to be at school support. So the interventions you're providing are additional to those that are being provided at classroom support level. So the class teacher is still providing those differentiation techniques. They are not being removed from the child just because they're at school support. Again, everything is documented within the school support file, and it is the SET teacher that is leading this stage of the continuum. So you're gathering information, and you can see on the slide there's a variety of people that you might be gathering information from. I've popped a little asterisk beside outside agencies, as a child may or may not be dealing with outside agencies. Again, you can see the school support plan, or SSP, in the right-hand corner of the slide, and it will describe the pupil's learning difficulties and outline targets and set a timescale for review of those. School Support Plus is the upper end of the continuum, and it's where a child's needs are not being met at school support level. And these are the children in the class that require a significant level of support. And as I said previously, they may or may not have a diagnosis at this level. That does not determine whether they're at this level, but generally at this stage, you're looking at involving outside agencies just due to the level of need. And all information that you've previously gathered, previous assessments that have been carried out at school support or classroom support level, again, are relevant here. So reviews of the classroom support or school support plans take place, and their response to previous interventions is considered. And school-based assessments are carried out, and they're more intensive in nature. So again, I've just popped this here. It's a kind of a grid that you can keep track of classes that you work with, that classroom support, and school support plus. And again, this is just from NEPs themselves, and it just keeps track of the children that you're supporting, the nature of the supports that you're providing, and the focus of support.
So as you can see at all levels of continuum, collaboration is key. So working with the classroom teacher, working with parents, and working with pupil themselves where appropriate. And then everyone works together towards a common goal, and information is gathered at each stage using a variety of assessment techniques, which we are going to focus on for the remainder of this webinar. So assessment can be carried out in the following areas. So a child's personal and social skills, their cognitive ability, motor skills, language and communication in literacy and numeracy, their attitude towards school and their motivation to learn, and also in how they access the curriculum. So when you gather information, these are questions which you might find beneficial. So what are the child's strengths? So it's important not just to focus on the child's needs and their areas of learning in which they are finding difficult, but also to focus on the child's strengths, as these strengths can be very beneficial for planning their support and how, what strategies you are going to employ to support them. You are also going to gather information on the areas, with the specific areas that they need help with. So there may be several areas that a particular pupil needs help with. So you are going to have to prioritize these areas. You will be assessing where they currently stand in these areas, and hopefully some of the assessments we discuss in this webinar will support you in doing that. And then using these assessments and the information you've gathered, you are going to determine how best to support the child in these areas. And you might also consider what activities or what strategies might motivate them to learn, and perhaps the strengths that you have discovered might help you in choosing these activities. We are going to attach a PDF of the template here on the right-hand side of the screen, which you may find useful in gathering information and answering these 5 questions. When choosing assessments and when assessing a child, like I mentioned, you might feel that it is appropriate to assess a child in a variety of areas, so therefore they might benefit from a variety of assessments. Before we delve into assessments further, it's just very important to highlight that time spent assessing a child is never time wasted, and although this can be time consuming at the start of the process and at the various levels of the continuum of support, it's very important in allowing you to set appropriate targets, choose activities and support strategies to support a child, and also to monitor their progress. Before we look at infant assessments, I just want to briefly mention these 3 very useful assessment tools, and there are links to all 3 on this slide. So the first, I'm sure you are all aware of, it's the Assessment in Primary School Curriculum Guidelines. Now this is, well used and it's an evidence-based resource. It's used by many teachers all over the country. It has a huge amount of assessment strategies that range from child focused assessment to teacher focused, and there's a lot of photocopiables in that can be very useful as well. There's also a certain amount of case studies and portfolios based on certain children with specific learning needs that you might find useful, particularly if you have a child that is similar to them in your class, or that you're supporting them in SET. The second one here is the Continuum of Support, which we've previously alluded to. This is the resource pack and also contains a lot of photocopiables which could be useful. Some of which we'll be addressing later on in this webinar. And then finally, the Behavioural, Emotional and Social Difficulties Continuum of Support, which also has a number of useful assessments like the ABC chart, the total observation schedule, and the frequency observation schedule that we'll be addressing later as well. So the first series of assessments that we're going to look at are infant assessments. So some of these you might be familiar with, others you may not. Some of them you might have in your school, others you might not have access to. So we are going to address as many as we can, and hopefully you will be able to have access to some of them within your schools and you will find them useful. So the first here is the Belfield Infant Assessment Profile. And it is a test which is designed to assist teachers in identifying particular strengths and needs of children in the infant classes. So like we said, it's specific to the infant classes and it's only for pupils aged 4 to 7, and it is administered individually. It can be administered by class teachers, but usually it is administered by special education teachers, as they, the class teacher will be teaching the other children in the class, and it's an individually administered test. The next is one that many schools all over the country use in their infant classrooms, and it is the MIST, or the Middle Infant Screening Test. So this test gives an overall picture of a pupil's performance and their learning strategies in relation to early reading and writing. So it identifies early literacy difficulties and also identifies the lowest achieving 20 to 25% of pupils in the group that is assessed. So it's administered to a group, which means that it's faster to administer, and hence why it is used in a lot of infant classes. And it can be administered by either the class teacher or the special education teacher. Some schools have policies in their school whereby, it's always a set teacher that administers the MIST, whereas others, it might be the class teacher or it might be whoever's available at that particular time. The MIST is quite a broad test, so it's often used just as a screener to identify, like is mentioned here, the lowest the children with early literacy difficulties in the infant classroom. The next test here is the test 2R, which is the Trinity Early Screening Test. So oftentimes, if the MIST is used in a school as a screener across the whole class, the test 2R can be individually administered after that. And it can be used to devise a learning program to meet the learning needs of pupils. So it is for children who are 5 or 6 years old, and it is divided into 2 parts. Now, I know I said that, it can be used after the MIST is used to screen the entire class. The individual section can be used, but a screener test can also be group administered. Now, it is quite time consuming, so it's usually administered to small groups. It would be quite labor intensive to administer the test 2R to the entire class, as it's very time consuming. But the second part of the test, which is individually administered, is often used to identify particular sub-skills which have not yet been mastered by pupils. It's based on reading development, and training is available through local education centres. And we do recommend that, if this test is available in your school, that you do engage in training, as it can be a tricky one to administer.
I'm just going to move on now. We're moving beyond infant assessment to just talk about general literacy assessments. So the first one we're going to chat through is the ARC. Now, there is an early reading component of the ARC that can be used with younger classes, which for the 4 to 7-year-olds, but this assessment isn't just for infant-based, it's a broader assessment. So it's a diagnostic reading assessment, and it looks at reading and comprehension, and it is administered 1-to-1. Now, generally, it's not that time consuming in comparison to other assessments. You probably, depending on the level to which the child goes to, it might be in and around 20, could be 30 minutes. But sometimes it could be as little as 10 minutes, depending on how far the child progresses with the test. So as I said, there's an early reading component, which is for 4 to 7 year olds or older pupils with reading difficulties. Then there's the passage reading section, which is they read a fiction and a non-fiction passage, and they answer some comprehension questions on that. And to be able to move on to the next comprehension question, they have to be able to answer the questions on the text correctly first. Again, I would recommend getting training in the ARC. There is now if you spend some time reading the manual, you would be able to familiarize yourself with it in comparison to other tests. But if it is possible to get training in it, I would. And then there's the passage reading secondary, which for primary school, you'd only be looking at 6th class. Because as I said, the passage reading primary goes up as far as 11-year-olds. Now, something that is really useful if you are administering the ARC, what I found the most time consuming part of the ARC is actually scoring it. But there is a link here, and I'm just going to click into it if it allows me to. So this is a scoring tool that you can use to correct the ARC. It's a score conversion tool. You just need to pop in all the details you can see on the page. And again, it's just details that you would have been finding out if you were using the book. And it creates a really nice graph that you can use to show parents. And you can see an example of it here. So you can see that the error types they've made are they falling down more in reading accuracy, reading rate, or in comprehension? Another one, again, NARA is quite similar to the ARC. Unfortunately, there isn't an online screening tool, which is why I prefer to use the ARC, and the ARC is what's available in my school. Again, the assessments that are available in your school are going to determine which assessments you carry out. But similar to the ARC, it measures comprehension, accuracy, and rate of reading. And it can be used for children aged 6 to 12. And again, it is an individually administered assessment. It contains diagnostic information the same way that the ARC does, providing standard age scores and reading ages. So it is very similar to the ARC. You may have it in your school instead of the ARC, but if you do have the ARC, it's just useful that you can use that online screening tool. One that I find the most useful when it comes to literacy assessments, and one that definitely needs training if you can get it. Now, again, if you spent enough time with the manual, you would get your head around it. Or if there's somebody in your school that has spent enough time with the manual and can kind of chat through the Wyatt with you, it would be useful. So the Wyatt it's administered individually, and it's suitable for all pupils in primary school. You'll need a timer. Now, generally, I just use my phone. And you'll need something to record the child speaking. Again, maybe look at the policy in your school. We just use our phones and then delete the recording afterwards, because you need to be able to listen back to the children speaking when you are correcting it yourself afterwards. So it includes the following tests: spelling, word reading, reading speed, reading rate, and reading comprehension. It provides quite an in-depth information about children. Now, if you know a child is going to be seeing an educational psychologist, then I wouldn't administer the Wyatt within 6 months of that, because generally the educational psychologist will be administering the Wyatt themselves. Now, as you can see, the picture on the screen is the Wyatt 3T, and that T stands for teacher, which means that it's the teacher assessment, and the educational psychologist will be administering a more in-depth version. But generally, educational psychologists prefer if the Wyatt isn't administered within 6 months of a child visiting them for an assessment. So if you know a child is going to be attending an educational psychologist within 6 months, I'd be looking at something like the ARC instead of the Wyatt. The Wyatt is one of the tests that can be used when applying for an Irish exemption. If you have a child with significant reading difficulties, it may be appropriate to apply for an Irish exemption, and we've popped a link to the circular there. And again, it's important to note that the study of Irish does not, or an exemption from the study of Irish does not apply if you're in a Gael school. So I've popped, again, this has come directly from the circular, the tests that can be accepted when it comes to looking for an Irish exemption. So there's either word reading, reading comprehension, or spelling. So when you're looking at a child with literacy difficulties, they need to score at or below the 10th percentile in either word reading, reading comprehension, or spelling. They need to have reached at least second class, and they need to have significant literacy difficulties that are documented. And again, that would be documented really in the student support file across school support plans or school support plus plans, and that the literacy difficulties have persisted despite targeted intervention. So again, in your own time, you can look at the discrete tests there. So a parent or guardian must apply in writing to the principal of the school asking for a certificate of exemption, and the school needs to acknowledge this and then check to see if the child meets the criteria. The application form and the checklist can be found at that link here, and then the parents sign the certificate of exemption and a copy is kept at the school. Eva is now going to chat through a few more.
So we're going to continue looking at some more literacy assessments. So the one we have here on the screen is the Schnell reading assessment. Now, although the Schnell is an older reading assessment, it can be particularly useful. And look, it is another piece of the puzzle when you are supporting a child with literacy difficulties. So it is, like I said, it is old, but all of these assessments can be beneficial when putting together a profile of a child's strengths and areas that they need support in terms of literacy. So it is administered individually. And the total number of words that are read correctly will give an idea of a child's reading age. So as with many tests, the result of like I said, the result of the Schnell reading test is important to be just not to be looked at in isolation, and it's available to download on this link. So lots of the links that we address in this webinar, they're actually freely available downloads, which we find really useful because, as we keep mentioning, it is what's available in your school that you can use, where there's lots of literacy assessments that are freely available online that can be very beneficial and give a lot of information. This one is particularly useful. So this is a core vocabulary assessment. Now this is based on the American system of grading, but they just map roughly onto the Irish classes. So, you know, first class is similar to grade 2, grade 1, and vice versa. But it will be a case of looking at the test, you know, looking at the children that you're supporting or the class that you're supporting and seeing what section of the test that you feel appropriate to administer them. And like I said, it's another piece of the puzzle for supporting children with vocabulary difficulties that may contribute to overall reading problems. So it's a measure of a pure measure of reading vocabulary in that there is no need to comprehend the text. So sometimes a child's comprehension ability can influence how they're scoring on vocabulary tests, whereas in this vocabulary assessment, it's not going to come into play because there's no context to provide clues to the meaning of the words for children. It is a screener, so it can be used to help identify pupils whose vocabulary knowledge is significantly lower than their peers. And it can be, like we said, used as a screener and administered in groups or as a whole class, but it can also be administered individually if that is what you are looking for. It takes approximately 10 to 20 minutes to administer, so it's quite time efficient as well, and it is freely available on that link. In terms of phonological assessment, which we always recommend assessing in, particularly if a child is struggling with literacy, these difficulties may be due to a difficulty with phonological processing. So we always recommend doing a phonological awareness assessment, and this is one that can be used for pupils that are all the way from junior infants up to age 11, so 5th or 6th class. And it's a collection of tests that assess phonological awareness in different areas. So it tests a child's ability to isolate initial sounds in words, the speed of their phonological production, their ability to identify rhyme in words, whether they can segment and blend words together, and then their retrieval of phonological information from their long-term memory. It also assesses their ability to decode, blend, their working memory, and phoneme segmentation and deletion as well. So it's quite a comprehensive battery of tests. They are individually administered and it takes 20 to 25 minutes. And it's in paper format as well. So this is one that you would have to have in your school readily available if you were to use it. This is a screener which is quite useful. It's available on the same website as the core vocabulary assessment, which is really great reading, which is a particularly useful website with lots of surveys and screeners that can be used. And this particular one is useful for phonological awareness. More specifically, under the umbrella term of phonological awareness, we can also assess in the specific area of phonemic awareness, if that's the area in which you think your pupil has difficulty in. So phonemic awareness, this assessment, the first one can be downloaded from the NCSE website, formerly the SESS, and then the second one here is another phonemic awareness assessment, which can be found on this link. So it's, I suppose, the idea of providing all of these links and all of these assessments is for you to look at them and for you to decide which one you think is most appropriate to support your pupil, as the support and the assessment will vary based on the class level of the child and their strengths and weaknesses in relation to reading. We also recommend that when you're assessing a child's literacy ability, you look at their phonics, their understanding of phonics. I'm sure we're all very familiar with the one here that's on the right-hand side of the screen, which is the Jolly Phonics pupil student checklist, which goes through the phonics taught using the Jolly Phonics program, which is used in many schools. But there are two other phonics assessments here, which are freely available to download. The NEPS one at the bottom is particularly useful, and it's available on page 93 of the document that we have linked.
So I'm just going to chat through a phonics assessment for older children, because often we can consider, I suppose, phonics as a younger, a more junior class assessment, but it is important that you consider phonics assessments for the more senior students as well, particularly if they're experiencing significant reading difficulties. It may be that they have difficulties with phonics. So there is a link to a free phonics assessment that can be seen here. You can see just a snapshot of it on the right-hand side. And you can see it kind of moves from more simpler phonics to kind of multi-syllabic words. It also comes with a class grid that you can write in your children's names and then tick off the ones that they have, I suppose, succeeded with, that they know, and pinpoint out the children that are having specific difficulties, maybe with prefixes or suffixes or multisyllabic words. I'm actually planning on using this phonics assessment with my class this week. As I said, I have fifth class. So the set teacher assigned to my class will be taking the children out. As I said, it is individually administered, so you need to be one-to-one with a child. So in that instant, I suppose it is a little bit time consuming, but I think it's worthwhile. It can be used even to direct station work or small group work if there are specific children that are supposed they're missing certain aspects of the phonics assessment. Another assessment that is useful is this decoding assessment, and you can see again part of it on the right-hand side. Again, it's free, which is useful if you don't have a lot of assessments in your school. So it is one-to-one assessment of phonics skills for struggling readers from the middle of kind of first class all the way up to the end of primary school. We can use it, and it's efficient and it's easy to administer. And it just kind of, I suppose, highlights the skills that they have mastered and the ones that they're finding difficulty, so you can pinpoint targets. So the link to it is down there. And as I said, it is a free download. Another aspect of reading that you might be looking at is fluency. And this just gives a useful fluency tracker. Sometimes we might not notice that children have made progress. So it's just useful, even if you're meeting parents, to be able to pinpoint, well, this is where their fluency was at, how many words they were reading correct per minute, and kind of track the child's progress as they continue to work with you on the interventions. Another useful one to administer is a spelling screener. Children might in schools do the Drumcondra spelling test or other standardized spelling tests, but it's just useful sometimes to have additional screeners if you want to gather other information throughout the year. And it gathers information about the pupil's knowledge, understanding, and application of phonics. What's useful about this assessment is that it can be administered whole class, and that it's also free to download. So the link is there, and you can, again, just see a glimpse of it on the right-hand side. As you can see, it starts off quite basic, and then it moves its way up to more difficult words. Other assessments you might carry out are on sight vocabulary. So it's useful to have access to sight word checklists for assessment purposes. And I suppose the research behind assessing and teaching sight vocabulary of late has changed. And previously we would have taught words by sight, whereas now those words that we would have traditionally known as sight words have actually been divided into two categories. Words that are phonetically decodable, for example, and or it, and then those that have irregular spellings. So high frequency words that are regularly spelled and decodable are now being referred to as flash words, and that's because they can be read in a flash. And examples of flash words are here: can, not, and did. Whereas irregularly spelled sight words are now being referred to as heart words because some part of the word can be decoded regularly, but then other aspects or parts of the word need to be learned by heart. So they're used so frequently that it's important that they can be read and spelt automatically. So, for example, said, the S and the D parts of the word can be decoded like normal, but it is the AI part of the word that needs to be remembered. And there is a heart placed above that part of the word for the child to remember that that is the part that they need to learn by heart. So we have popped again some free links to sight vocabulary, or as they're more commonly known now as flash words and heart words. And again, you can take these assessments and subdivide them into flash words and heart words. So there's the NEP's first 100 words and second 100 words checklist, the Dolch word, again, which is 220 high frequency words, the Fry's list, which is 1,000 words, and then another provider of heart and flash words is Mrs. Learning Bee, and she's on Instagram, and she has hers divided into flash and heart words. Other sight words links are here. The SNP list for which is more for older classes. Again, this is not something I'd be using in isolation, but it is useful in terms of building vocabulary for children. And this document here, it provides 5 separate sight word assessments. And again, in your own time, it can be useful to just click into these links and pick out the ones that are useful for your children or the class that you are working with. And for assessment purposes, the last link, which is Reading Rockets, has tables of flash and sight word or heart words that can be used for assessment purposes. In terms of comprehension, if you wanted something, I suppose, online, the STAR reading it's a paid test, so it is something that your school would have to purchase. It's a computer adaptive test, which means that as the child is doing it, it adapts the difficulty of the test based on the accuracy of the answers that the child has given. So it takes about 20 minutes and it identifies where the child needs support. So where they need urgent intervention would be highlighted in red. Yellow means they should be getting some intervention, and it gives a general reading age for the pupil. And again, it kind of sets targets for steps that you should undertake with the child. Unfortunately, it is based on the English curriculum. There isn't an equivalent in Ireland, and it is €4 per child per year. And again, there is a link there for you if you want to read a little bit more about it. But again, it would have to be a school decision to decide to invest in this assessment.
So now we are going to move on from reading assessments and focus more on knowledge of language assessments. So this one here is a very popular one. Many schools have it. So it's one that you might be familiar with, and it is the British Picture Vocabulary Scale. So it's an assessment for a child's receptive or their hearing vocabulary, and it can help a teacher identify any delay that a pupil may have in their vocabulary development. It is suitable for pupils from junior infants all the way up to 6th class, as it's for children aged 3 to 17 years. It is administered individually, and it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to administer. And for each question, you say a word and the pupil responds by selecting a picture from 4 options that best illustrates the word's meaning. So it's not a reading assessment, but a vocabulary assessment. There are a number of language assessments available on this link here, which is from the NCSE. So it's one that if you do click into this link to look for these assessments, there's a page with a wide variety of language assessments on it. So this particular one is useful as it is on key characteristics of speech, language, and communication, and it's an easy checklist. So you can see a snippet of it here on the left-hand side. It goes through characteristics of receptive language, expressive language, that children may or may not be exhibiting. This here is a listening skills checklist, and Aisling is going to open up this one because we find this one particularly useful for identifying the listening skills that are associated with a variety of stages. So here you can see the early stage listening skills based on a child's communication with their peers, the demonstration of basic skills, listening skills in the classroom, like interaction skills, and it moves on then to the second stage that of a child's listening development, and then also stage 3 as well. So we find this one particularly useful as it's very detailed, and it will give you a good overview of areas of listening that a child may or may not be struggling with. The next language assessment is this language ladder assessment, which is also available on the NCSE website. And it is, I suppose, a rubric of, a child's language abilities in terms of listening, speaking, reading, and writing.
I'm just going to chat through some numeracy assessments. I've popped a link to the PDST, and it just provides you, as we can see, kind of on the left-hand side, an assessment pack for fractions, place value, shape and space, data, area, capacity, length. Money are some of the ones that are there. And as you can see, they're also available through Van the Gaeilge, which is useful for Gael Scoilina. I've just pulled out an example on the right-hand side of part of these assessment packs. So particularly if you're working with children, you might maybe be focusing on the numbers strand if you're working with a child with special educational needs and you want to pinpoint the, I suppose, the aspect or the area that they're at. So it has just pulled out level, say, B1, recognize, use, exchange, and calculate using coins up to the value of 50 cent, moving on to B2, B3, and B4. So again, you can see where the child is at. Are they only available or able to do that target working with concrete materials? Are they able to do it when it's pictorial? Or are they able to do it if it's abstract? It can just be useful when pinpointing targets for a school support plus plan or IEP to have these developmental experiences laid out for you in the variety of strands. What I find is the most useful assessment when it comes to maths is Maths Tracker. This is a CD that can be purchased and it comes with a junior. So there's a junior CD and then there's a senior CD. So junior being 1st to 3rd class and senior CD being 4th to 6th class. It is based on the Irish curriculum, so the maths curriculum, the 1999 curriculum, and it can highlight specific areas of difficulty. So for example, if you were working with a child in 5th class, you might administer 4C, which would be the end of 4th class, to see how much of that they have, I suppose, achieved. You may decide you're going to administer 4A, 4B, and 4C, which will be the entirety of the 4th class curriculum. Or you may decide you're actually going to use the junior CD because the child is significantly struggling and it can highlight the specific areas that a child is struggling in. It can be time consuming to administer, but I think it is very useful. So it provides a printout of results afterwards. So you can see that there on the left-hand side that I did with a child, and we did 5A, 5B, and 5C, and it provides a percentage in each of the strands. So you can specifically see the areas that they are finding difficult. So kind of say measures there is jumping out as an area of significant difficulty. Now it's multiple choice, so it shows up on the screen. So if you are having a child administer it or complete the assessment, the child is set up at a laptop and they are clicking through and choosing the answer. I would encourage them to have maybe a pen and a paper so that you can encourage them to work it out, because sometimes children might kind of get a little bit frustrated and just click a random answer. So then you're not getting, I suppose, a clear overview. Now, on the previous CD, the child had to complete, we'll say, all of 5A in one go. It was not able to save the progress. There's 50 questions. So there's 50 questions in 5A, 50 questions in 5B, and 50 questions in 5C. And it's the same all the way up and down. Now, apparently in the new CD, it says if you go into oshna.com, which is the link here, it says that the ability to save is in the newer version of the CDs. But in the older version of the CD, if a child is starting 5A, they need to have the time and the space to be able to complete all of 5A before moving on. It will not be able to save their progress unless they complete that specific section. I would also recommend having the volume turned down on the laptop, because with the maths tracker, it actually bings if they get the answer correct. And it also gives a kind of another different sound if they get an answer incorrect. So it can be just a little demotivating for students if they're hearing that sound. So before you start, as I said, once you start it, you can't exit it without it saving the progress. Just make sure that the sound is turned down on the laptop. When I previously carried out the maths tracker, what I would have done is I would have, I suppose, been working with other children while a child is, we'll say, out in my room completing the maths trackers. You could still kind of work with other children, because the idea is that they're completing the maths tracker independently, but you're still there and making sure that they are completing it correctly. And if anything happens on the laptop, that you're able to jump in. But that, I suppose, when it is time consuming, it's great if you were able to kind of take other children for other things that you might need to do. Another maths assessment, again, this is another one that needs to be purchased, is the MALT. So it's split into stage 1, which is from 4 to 8.5, and stage 2, which actually starts at 7 up to 12.5. So there are tests 5, 6, and 7 in stage 1, and tests 8, 9, 10, and 11 in stage 2. And again, it just covers various aspects of maths. Unlike the maths tracker, it's not based on an Irish curriculum, it's not Irish made, but it just can be useful as another assessment if you're looking at for numeracy. Another useful one is the basic number screening test. Again, this is UK based, it's not Irish based, but what is useful, it's delivered orally. So if a child has difficulty with reading, this one will specifically assess their numeracy skills rather than focus on their reading difficulties. So it's particularly useful if you have poor readers and you want to assess their maths ability. It can also be used with older kind of children who struggle. It's quick to give and it's easy to mark, and there's parallel forms A and B, which means that you can retest to assess progress. So it takes about 30 minutes or less to administer, and it can be assessed. You can use it for groups in class group situations, or with individual pupils if you want to just do it with a number of pupils.
So another area that you might be assessing is a child's general ability, so not specific to literacy or numeracy, which we've been talking about up until now. So here we are going to discuss some general ability assessments. Now, some schools have specific policies in relation to these general ability assessments and may or may not administer one or more of these assessments to various class levels at various times of the year. It's very important, you know, to get to know what the policy is in your school, maybe speak to the set coordinator in your school to determine what tests are available and if there is a policy regarding which and when we administer them to children and classes, as they will vary between schools. So the first one here is the NNRIT, which replaced the NRIT. It's the new non-reading intelligence test. So I suppose it assesses aspects of language and thinking that are not related to reading. So it's an oral administration. And it's specifically useful for allowing children who may struggle in areas of literacy to do themselves justice and to I suppose show their level of general ability that's not related to their level of reading ability. The next one is the NVRT, which is the non-verbal reasoning test. So this test is used to understand and assess the abilities of pupils who think more easily in images than words. So as it says in the title, it is not related to a child's language development. It doesn't involve reading, it doesn't involve oral comprehension, and therefore it can be used to measure the potential of pupils who have limited literacy skills or children with English as an additional language. The next one here is the sister test to the one in the previous slide. So this is the verbal reasoning test. So the previous one was the non-verbal reasoning test. This is the verbal reasoning test. So it assesses a child's skills in verbal thinking. And it covers areas such as vocabulary, verbal analogies, and logical reasoning. It can be administered either individually or in groups, and I suppose before giving or administering this test, it's important to give pupils some examples of other tests, just so they can familiarize themselves with the types of questions that they can expect, as they're very difficult. These two tests, children can find them very difficult.
Yes, so the familiarization test is just for the VRT, and it's given the day before. So you get within the test, there is like a pamphlet for a familiarization test that the children must complete the day before the verbal reasoning test. The NVRT doesn't come with a familiarization test, as I suppose it's a little bit more straightforward, while still being quite difficult. It's a little bit more straightforward to, I suppose, carry out for children than the VRT is.
It also can be useful to see if there is a difference between a child's performance on a test like the non-verbal reasoning test and their performance on the verbal reasoning test, as we're not promoting a discrepancy model, because obviously we're moving away from discrepancy models, but it might be, I suppose, a way of seeing if there is a difference in a child's language comprehension, and if that's affecting their scores on those general ability tests. So some schools might administer the VRT to certain class levels, like first class, third class, fifth class, and then the NVRT to the other classes, or vice versa. It really just depends on your school, and some schools might not have these available, or they might be just used for certain pupils. So it's useful to get to know the procedures that are in your school. We're going to move on now from literacy, numeracy, and general ability, and we are going to look at some assessments for challenging behaviour. And oftentimes the set teacher can be supporting children with challenging behaviour. So if you are, it's important to ask yourself the following questions. So if there is a challenging behaviour, is there a trigger for this behaviour? So is there something that's causing it? Is it happening in all lessons, or is it just happening in one lesson? So maybe it's a behaviour that's specifically related to a maths lesson because a child is struggling in that area, or maybe it's specifically related to a PE lesson because, you know, there is a lot of sensory overload in the hall, and it's loud and there's a lot going on. So it's important to find out what lessons, if it's occurring in, or if it's occurring in all lessons. Is it a new behaviour? So, or is this a behaviour that's existed for a while? Has there been a change at home? It's important to discuss these changes with parents to find out if there's something at home that could be triggering this behaviour in your pupils. What's their social circle like? Do they have a good circle of friends? How are they interacting with their friends? So maybe some of those language assessments that we mentioned earlier that relate to peer interaction could be useful. What's their academic progress like? Because very often there are links between challenging behaviour and academic struggles, because I suppose there can be effects on children's motivation to learn if they're struggling, which can in turn affect their behaviour. Or maybe, you know, they might have low self-esteem as a result of academic problems. They might not be able to access the lesson, so that's something that's important to consider. And it's important as SCT that you discuss with the class teacher and discuss with previous teachers and with the child's parents, you know, how has this been progressing? So have they had these difficulties before? Have they had difficulties accessing lessons in the past? So that you can figure out how to support them appropriately. And then also obviously to identify what the nature of the behavior is as well. So are these behaviors low key? Are they continuous in nature? Are they just happening sporadically? Are they seeking attention? What is the result of the behavior? So what's happening when they behave in a certain way? What consequence are we seeing? And then also it's very important, if the behavior is serious, it's something that needs to be addressed ASAP. So some assessments that could be useful for assessing these types of behaviours are as follows. So the first is an ABC chart, which is very commonly used by both class teachers and set teachers, but sometimes it's very hard for a class teacher to do these observational assessments while they're teaching the class. And you obviously want to assess a child when they're in their natural environment, they're in the classroom. So therefore a set teacher is often enlisted to support a class teacher with these. So an ABC chart, it's a very useful tool in determining how and why a behavior is occurring. So it's an observational tool, like I mentioned, and it allows you to record information about a particular behavior. The ABC stands for antecedent, so what is happening before the behavior occurred, behavior, so what is the child actually doing, and the consequence, so what's happening after the behavior. So, for example, if you are starting an Irish lesson, so the antecedent would be, the teacher says, okay, we're going to start Irish, take out your Irish copy. The behavior is the child takes their Irish copy and throws it on the ground, and the consequence is that the teacher is speaking to them about why that behavior isn't appropriate, and therefore it actually delays the beginning of the Irish lesson, which could be a factor that's feeding into that happening every single day, because they know that if they throw the copy on the ground and I suppose have a tantrum of sorts, that it's going to delay the Irish lesson beginning. So it's important that we use tools like this in order for us to reflect on how we are behaving as well, that might be feeding into certain behaviors in the classroom. There's a very useful video here at the bottom which shows you exactly how it's used, and there is a very useful template for an ABC chart in the resource pack, the Continuum of Support resource pack, which we alluded to earlier in the webinar. Here on the right-hand side, we have another assessment tool. It's a frequency chart. So it's different to the ABC chart in that it looks at a particular behavior and tracks it over a longer period of time. So as you can see here, you focus on one particular behavior and then you track it at different stages of the day across the whole week. And now it doesn't have to be across the whole week. It could be just across one day, but you'll have different templates available. And the template for this one is the one on the right-hand side of the screen, and that's the link that you see here. But the idea is that it gives you an overview of a child's behavior. And then sometimes it might be useful, depending on the child, depending on the class level, it could be useful to tell the child what you are doing and why you are doing it as well. Sometimes it may not be appropriate to tell the child, and you have to use your own discretion with that. Another observational tool here is the TOAD observation checklist, and the TOAD system allows you to collect information about 4 specific classroom behaviours, and that is derived from the title. So talking out of turn, out of seat, attention problems, and disruption. And this one is particularly useful if you are supporting a child that has difficulties in these 4 areas. So the difference with this observation tool is that information is collected at either 15, 30, or 60 seconds intervals. So for this one, you definitely absolutely will need a teacher doing this by themselves, so they could focus on those time intervals. It's not possible to do that and to teach at the same time. And then the idea is that all 4 behaviours are observed at the same time.
So I'm just going to give you an overview of just some useful social skills checklist. Again, you might be using a social skills program, and usually they come with their own checklists and assessments, but these links provide useful social skills checklists. So there is the helpful counsellor one, and then there is also one from Teachers Pay Teachers. The 2 Teachers Pay Teachers ones are actually both freebies, so they can be downloaded for free. Another assessment we're going to look at is gross motor skills and fine motor skills. And again, these are both free. Now, usually if you're looking at gross or fine motor skills, you will hopefully have the involvement of an OT. But if it's not possible or you're waiting on an OT, it can just be useful to have specific checklists. So there is one for gross motor skills and fine motor skills up to 8 years old. can be found on the following documents. And again, they're both free PDFs that can be downloaded. And so we've come to the end of our webinar, and I just want to thank you very much for completing this webinar. And if there's any questions or if there was any specific assessments that you wanted to ask a little bit more about, do feel free to contact us. Our Instagram is on the slide there, so it's at Lanúnta Education, and we do endeavour to get back to all the DMs. So if there's any specific questions or queries that you want to double check, please do follow us and DM us on Instagram. But thank you so much from both myself and Aoife. Thank you.
Thank you very much.